Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyava Asyatya Deshatani Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Guru Maharaj ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So Hare Krishna, dear devotees, thank you very much for joining us for the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. I'd like to seek your good wishes and your kind blessings so that we can recite something to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead and His pure devotees. So we can recite a verse from the Hari Bhakti Vilas. This is a scripture written by Sanatana Goswami, one of the 6 Goswamis, who is a disciple of Lord Chaitanya himself. And this verses come from the Skanda Purana. So we can recite together. Sarva Shastra Mayi Gita Sarva Deva Mayi Yatha Sarva Dharma Mayi Asmat Tasmat Etam Samabhashyat.
Bhagavad Gita contains the essence of all literatures. It is a sum total of all the demigods and the sum total of all religion. Therefore, one should study the Bhagavad Gita thoroughly.
So we are not necessarily studying it thoroughly, but we are studying it systematically. We've done chapters 1 to 5, and many lessons have come from those chapters, which we may not be able to imbibe all of them into our lives, but certainly we should know what those lessons are, with a view to, at some point, living those lessons, because the whole idea of Bhagavad Gita is to live it. And what we're trying to do is give a sort of practical suggestions that one can put into one's life and improve the spiritual quality of our lives, and at the same time live the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita. So that's the idea. So I hope devotees are finding this exercise useful. And we're starting with chapter 6 today. So at the end of chapter 5, Krishna gives Arjuna a very strong hint, because up to now, Arjuna has asked twice about renouncing, about not doing work, not doing his duty, if you like, and actually renouncing the fighting. In the 3rd chapter, he asked, and again in the 5th, right at the beginning of the 5th chapter, he asks again. He wanted clarification. So at the end of the 5th chapter, Krishna gave him a very strong hint about how, if he wanted to renounce, then what is the process? He's telling him that you need to cut out all external sense objects. You need to control your breathing. You need to keep your vision focused. So many different things. But in this chapter, he gives him a lot more information just to convince him that he's not suitable for the yogic lifestyle. So this chapter is very interesting, as we will see. And nowadays, of course, we see people are very interested in yoga, hatha yoga, the physical side of yoga, and the pranayama, the breathing side of it, to improve their physical and emotional well-being. But most times, the spiritual aspect is not there. It's either ignored or it cannot be accessed. And in this chapter, we'll see why it can't be accessed. Krishna explains the path of Astanga Yoga in its entirety. The themes of this are, he first of all starts with explaining the state of the mind, which is very interesting. Then he explains in some detail the process of Astanga Yoga. And Arjun, hearing what Krishna has to say about renunciation in Astanga Yoga, questions this practice. And he says to Krishna, "This is so hard." And then Krishna guides him. And then Arjun, still a little bit perplexed by Krishna's explanation of Astanga Yoga, asks the question, what happens to that spiritualist who does not complete, doesn't achieve the end result? Is he neither in this world nor in the next? Is he lost completely because he's come out of the material, but he hasn't achieved the spiritual? So what happens to that yogi? Wonderful question, and really a question for us. And then the final theme of this chapter is Krishna explains who is the best yogi. So without further ado, let's do the first 9 verses. Is it? Oh yes, Gita, would you like to read? Or would anybody else like to volunteer? Nani Ben? Is anybody there? Everybody asleep already?
Yeah, I'll read. Yeah, okay, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you.
Sorry, I unmuted myself. Okay.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Chapter 6, Dhyan Yoga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text 1. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as is obligated is in the renounced order of life, and he is the true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. Text 2. What is called renunciation, you should know to be the same as yoga, or linking oneself with the Supreme, O son of Pandu, for one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification. Text 3. For one who is a neophyte in the eightfold yoga system, work is said to be the means, and for one who is already elevated in yoga, cessation of all material activities is said to be the means. Text 4. A person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. Text 5. One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. Text 6. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of the friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. Text 7. For one who has conquered the mind, the super soul is already reached for his attained tranquility. To such a man, a happiness and distress, heat and the cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. Text 8. A person who is said to be established in self-realization and is called a yogi or a mystic when he is fully satisfied by virtue of acquired knowledge and realization. Such a person is situated in transcendence and is self-controlled. He sees everything, whether it is pebbles, stones, or gold, as the same. Text 9. A person is considered still further advanced when he regards honest well-wishers, affectionate benefactors, the neutral mediators, the envious friends and enemies, the pious and the sincere, all with an equal mind.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Naniben. Appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yes. Hare Krishna. So summary these 9 verses. We often hear this voice within us. Sometimes it says do it, sometimes it says don't do it. So we sometimes wonder what that voice is. Of course, the mind is potentially that voice. Paramatma can also be that voice, especially when he says don't do it, and or don't do anything wrong anyway. mind is essentially a storehouse of memories and experiences, and it offers a lot of options to the individual. Should I do this? You should do this, you should do that. And an uncontrolled mind will simply agitate, misguide, and entangle the soul within this world. Most people, 90%, maybe more, don't even realize that we have an uncontrolled mind, because whatever the mind says, we just do it. It's as if that instruction is our own instruction, not the mind's instruction, but our own instruction. We don't even know that there is something higher than the mind. So this is quite a dangerous place to be, because it means that we will be simply controlled by the mind, which is not a controlled entity. And it forces us to succumb to our lower natures of lust, anger, and greed. Generally, that's what the mind does. It'll take us lower down the material existence. However, a controlled mind acts as a friend on our spiritual journey. It helps us make progressive and healthy choices, which bring us closer to God. And one can also experience peace, tranquility, freedom from duality of happiness and distress. This is when we preach that we are not the body. That's quite easy to sort of at least theoretically accept, because we can see the body is always changing. So we didn't have the same body that we were born with. We have a different body completely, not from a baby body to an adult body. So it's easy to understand and accept in theory that we are not this body, because it's changing all the time. But sometimes people argue that, okay, if we're not the body, then actually we must be the mind. But here in these 9 texts, Krishna explains very nicely, very clearly, that the mind can be our best friend or our worst enemy. So the mind is actually separate from the soul. It is a different entity from the soul. And we can also often observe the mind, and especially when we are in meditation. We can see the mind will try to agitate our consciousness. Everybody who chants Mahamantra, when you pick the beads up and you're completely on your own and you start chanting, often the mind will go to work or to household chores, or yesterday somebody had a go at you, so you'll be thinking about that, or last year somebody had a go at you and you'll be thinking about that, or you'll be worried about the future, lamenting about the past. These thoughts will come even whilst one is trying to meditate and focus on the Supreme Lord. So we can see when we're trying to control the mind becomes agitated, obstinate, and it will try to dictate to the soul that no, this is not the time to chant. This is not the time to engage in bhakti. You've got far more important things to do. You've got to work, you've got to do some project for work. So why don't you think about that instead? So we can observe the mind, that it will try to misguide us, especially when we are trying to focus on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the lesson is a very, very simple one, to understand that we are not the mind. We are separate from the mind, and we have to control this mind. Now, the controlling aspect of the mind we will do in this very chapter a little bit later, a couple of lessons time. But from these 9 verses, I think it's just very important to us clearly understanding we are not this mind. We are separate from it. That's the main point coming out from these 9 verses. Of course, Krishna is saying if the mind is controlled, it's your best friend. If it's not controlled, it's your worst enemy. But we'll see how to control the mind a couple of lessons down the road. So, Madhusudan Prabhu, thank you very much for joining us. And
thank you, Haribol, Hare Krishna, everyone. Yeah, Hare Krishna.
Give us your realizations.
Yeah, and when Krishna is saying that friend is the mind is the friend or an enemy, and like you say, we think that the mind is actually that's what we are, or we think we are, but we can witness it, everyday life, and then, like you say, when we meditate, we can actually. I mean, my mind is like a little safety filter that has been provided to us, comes along like a little subtle body, and there are the highest school of psychology would try to understand the mind, and I think that's as far as the most modern education will go. The highest universities of psychology and all that, and topmost psychologists would also just try to understand that we are something more than the body, and then maybe it's the mind. So they study the nature of the mind and how it affects and how it works. And some people are just totally unable to control. Then they try to make them aware that this is how your mind is functioning. Maybe, we need to try and control it. But there are so many different ways of trying to control, but it's difficult to control something. Like, elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita say, it's like a whirlwind, where you can't control the mind. But you can, early days in my Krishna consciousness, somebody was trying to say, there's a constant flow of thoughts that keep coming, and the mind's job actually is to try to, it thinks, this is what the mind, right? It thinks that I'm here to protect you and to defend you, and then we'll question you, and so it'll make you judge things, criticize, or make you aware. Oh, last time you tried, this, but you didn't enjoy it, and then last time you met this person, he looked at you and he made bad remarks and all that. So be careful, like that. There is some sort of, we experience that first time when we encounter, and maybe we go and sit in a lecture. I used to remember go and sit in my class in the lecture, and I see the teacher in front, and suddenly there is something arises in me, and it's like a filter system, mind trying to tell me, be careful of what you get tangled up here. It's like a resistance, something comes up inside you and try to resist. But if you, like they say, then the lecturer might say something like, mind is like a parachute, it only works when it's open. So we can try and keep an open mind. Don't let your mind, build walls of resistance to anything and everything, because you don't know that something might be. If you keep an open mind, then like we are all, like keep an open mind to this Bhagavad Gita, and you might learn something from it. But initially, the mind will say, "Why do you want to study Bhagavad Gita? That's a difficult text. Why do you want to get into it? Oh, don't listen to Krishna. Krishna says this, but it doesn't mean that. It means something else. Why don't you just instead of picking up the beads, why don't you just do something? Why not have a pizza tonight? And mind's job is to just, kind of trying to entertain us, judge us, guide us, try to protect and all that. But it's actually an uncontrolled thing. And if it's left uncontrolled, then we are doomed. We just get tangled up in everything. So that's why Krishna is saying, that, make your mind a friend. But I remember one devotee saying to me earlier, he says, thoughts are difficult to control. So it's like a fast flowing river, and you can't just put a dam and block it. You got to have a little bit of a, okay, build a dam, but then have some sort of a side channel and channel it in a different way. Channel it so that, you know, it's not going to completely overflow and all that. So channel it towards thoughts of Krishna, bhakti, or, you know, in a positive sense. So that's why there is positive and negative. So many books are written on positive mental attitude and all that. So, yeah, it's important. And yoga is a process. Yogis will try to sit and meditate, and then, and in our experience, when you do start to meditate, because most people don't meditate, you know, they don't have time to sit down for 20 minutes. I know early days I read, you know, and even the Beatles were tangled up with Maharishi Yogi and his transcendental meditation, you know, where you get a mantra. And before I came into Krishna consciousness, I got tangled up a little bit in that, read his book, and I did even find somebody, and he gave me a little bit of a mantra. He said, this is a secret mantra, you know, you meditate for 20 minutes. And then Maharishi Yogi's idea of transcendental meditation was that you get a mantra, you meditate for 20 minutes, and then the human consciousness will expand and arise and then come to a stage where there'll be peace and all that. I said, well, this, if it's a secret mantra, then how can you know? So you got tangled up in that. So even Beatles were tangled up in that for a while, you know, till George Harrison and Beatles, and they met Prabhupada, and the George Harrison, you know, totally drifted away from Maharishi Yogi. But, you know, even yogis, they'll try to, you know, control the mind by meditation. But when we do start to meditate, we do witness our mind trying to agitate us, like you say. But one acharya or somewhere, or some I did read, you know, or Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, somebody saying that when you're chanting and the mind is behaving like that, you got to try and tell, you're like a little monkey. I give you a job. Climb up this pole, up and down, and keep busy yourself there. But don't, or another acharya, somewhere it's written that I take a shoe and try and beat it down.
That's Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, yeah. That's right.
Yeah, is it Bhakti?
Bhaktisiddhanta.
That's right, yeah. So you will know more about that, but I just recollect that, you know.
No, and we're going to practice that in a couple of lessons' time, you know, how to actually control the mind.
Yeah, so that's, so anyway, yoga is a process of, and then Prabhupada in the purport, one of the purports says that basically, although there is Dhyana yoga and, you know, Ashtanga yoga and all these practices, but they're all there to actually ultimately re-establish and link ourselves to the Supreme Lord, you know. Mm-hmm. That's what yoga really means, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Very good. Very, very nicely explained. Naniben, you have a question or comment?
Yes, I was just thinking, doesn't it say somewhere in Bhagavad Gita that Krishna says he is the mind?
Yeah.
He doesn't say he's the mind.
He is the mind.
Because the mind is a material thing. Whilst we're living in this world, this mind of ours will always be with us. You know, we have two bodies. We have the gross body. The gross body, when we die, stays here. But the mind will carry this soul into the next body. The mind, intelligence, and ego, the subtle body. Yes. So the mind, our mind will always stay with it. It just gets reconfigured when we go into another body. So we don't remember our past. But Krishna doesn't say that he is the mind.
Where did I read that? It says after something, he says, I am the mind. And definitely
if you find it,
I will come back to you.
Yes, but even if he says he is the mind, he's not our mind, right?
No.
Our mind is our mind. Our mind is something that we have to control.
Yes, and that is we said about the uncontrolled mind, which does everything. But if it's a controlled mind, it can do a lot of good things as well, isn't it?
Yes, it can become our friend and actually take us to the spiritual path. Like Madhusudan Prabhu was just saying, you the uncontrolled is like an uncontrolled monkey, you know, jumping
Yes.
there, jumping,
Yes, jumping off. Yes.
and we'll be completely lost. And unfortunately, most people are in that situation. I include myself, because
Yes.
as yet, you know, I haven't managed to control the mind. We're trying, definitely trying, but it takes time, takes effort, and perseverance. And we'll see how Krishna guides Arjun, because Arjun makes this very point to Krishna, that my mind I cannot control, and then Krishna gives him guidance how to do it. So we'll also look at that guidance and put it into practice.
So Navi,
Sorry.
yeah, maybe you could elaborate in the aspect that, you know, when we start to transform and mind, is there something, because we all have a spiritual body as well, so there is some aspect of a spiritual mind, you know, I don't know, you have to elaborate.
Well, the soul, of course, the soul
So, yeah.
is fully conscious. And the soul is higher than intelligence, which is higher than the mind. Oh, in fact, I've got it here. Very good. Thank you, Madhusudan. That's a brilliant point. So if we see here, these wild horses are our senses, the five senses: the eyes, the nose, the ears, the tongue, and the touch. They are, the reins are the mind, and the intelligence is the driver, right? So the intelligence is supposed to control the mind, the reins, which controls the senses. But our senses are out of control because our mind is not under control, because our intelligence has not got refined spiritual intelligence yet. And we are here, the soul, which is living in this chariot of the body, and we are struggling because our mind is not controlled. That's generally the case for vast majority. And the soul is pure consciousness. The mind, the spiritual mind is within the soul. Of course, spiritual intelligence is within the soul, but the soul is completely spiritual, complete full consciousness. But at the moment, it's covered by Maya, the material nature, the three modes. And we'll come, this diagram I've just put in there, but actually we will see this in a lot of detail in the 13th chapter. So don't worry about all the different things going on in this picture. We're going to see this in a lot of detail when we look at the 13th chapter. But I just wanted to give this as a little summary, little idea of what the mind, what the soul is facing, what we are facing with an uncontrolled mind. We cannot control our senses. But when we sharpen our intelligence by reading Bhagavad Gita, by listening to lectures, by associating with devotees, by chanting, when we sharpen our intelligence, we can control these wild senses through the mind.
Prabhuji?
Yes.
Yeah. What is it logic and sensible thinking? Logic. Is it like in between the mind and the intelligence? Because sometimes that's the way to find the solution after the irrationalities that goes in your mind. You're trying to work out a bit of a logic issue to it. Is that by using your intelligence that you are trying to find your way out?
Yes. Basically, the mind is engaged in thinking, as Madhusudan Babu said, thinking, willing, and feeling. That's basically the mind. It has these sensations. This will cause you pain. This will cause you pleasure from past experiences. And the senses, these five horses, they leave deep impressions on the mind. So when you've enjoyed something, that will register in the mind through the senses. That will register in the mind. The next time, the mind will say, hey, you enjoyed that. So the mind is engaged in thinking, feeling, and thinking, willing, and feeling. But where the intelligence comes in, it holds the reins. So intelligence guides the mind. And if it's sharp intelligence, it'll guide the mind in the right way. Don't do this. because it will not help you. And there's 4 types of intelligence as well. One is, as soon as you hear something is wrong that you shouldn't do, you won't do it. That's first-class intelligence. Second type of intelligence is that you learn through experience. You know, you touch fire, you burnt, so you never touch it again. And through experience, you learn. So that's second class. And third class is through punishment. So you do something wrong, you're punished for it, and then you hopefully won't do it again. That's third class. And then the fourth type of intelligence is spiritual intelligence, where you use, you know, you're already in spiritual consciousness, and you're automatically controlling the mind. Does that help, Nariman?
Yes, yeah.
So intelligence, if it's sharp enough, it can control the mind. It's higher than the mind, and the soul is higher than the intelligence.
Navi, that comes with Krishna is saying, use your intelligence to control mind. But sometimes, the majority of the time, the mind is dominating and controlling even the intelligence.
Yes, because intelligence is not sharpened by knowledge.
Yeah, and you're not able to discriminate sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
With this mind doesn't discriminate that much. Whereas with intelligence, you can start to then train the mind.
That's it.
And then you can use instruments like logic and this and that. They're all part of the ways of developing your intelligence. But there is spiritual intelligence as well as material intelligence.
That's right.
You know, we've learned, the human beings have learned so much to use the intelligence to dominate over material nature. You know, we've built cars, built, you know, communication systems and this and that, you know, understood material nature, even scientifically, you know, atomic bombs and this and that, and all sorts of, some destructive, some positive, some good, you know, but that's what we've learned, because that's how we have to try to learn and exist in this material world. But yeah, you know, all the knowledge is in fact come from the Vedas, so they've tapped into the Vedic knowledge as well to learn and control over the material nature. And that's what we'd all try to do in our small ways. You know, we all gone to a driving instructor so that we can learn how to control a car. You know, you learn all the different aspects of the car and the laws and the you know, how the engine works and all that. But yeah, with faith, you know. So yeah.
Okay, unless there's any questions. Nariman, you have anything else?
Yeah, I was just thinking, where does knowledge fit into all this? Is it something around intelligence?
Yes.
Yeah.
The knowledge is, if the right knowledge is accepted by the intelligence, then the intelligence will make the decision to control the mind. So knowledge, especially spiritual knowledge, is meant for the intelligence. If you remember 429, the last verse of 4th chapter, Krishna says, you can sharpen your intelligence with the sword of knowledge. In fact,
I'll look into that.
last verse of chapter 4. It's one of the most incredible verses, because Krishna is doing that. Therefore, the doubts which have arisen in your heart out of ignorance should be slashed by the weapon of knowledge.
Yes.
Very powerful. Knowledge is so powerful. But of course, nowadays, knowledge can be used to exploit as well. So we have to be a little careful.
Yeah.
Anything else, Nariman? Or anybody else? Any questions? Any comments? Pretty?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Prabhu, where does ego come into this? Like on that level?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good question. So ego is part of the subtle body. So there's 3 aspects to the subtle body which we can't see: the mind, intelligence, and the false ego. And what the false ego is, basically thinking that I am this body. So the false ego is even more subtler than the intelligence. It's even more subtler to understand and to accept. False ego is basically misidentifying with this body. And I am the doer. That's right. I am the doer. And ultimately, the false ego is what keeps us in this world. Or it takes us to the Brahma Jyoti at the very most. That I am God. That's false ego is, again, by spiritual knowledge, false ego can also be controlled. But with the pure bhakti yoga, only bhakti yoga can control false ego.
And that's a good question, because with false ego and understanding what false ego is, that is the last sort of thing that can be the most stumbling block on our path to the spiritual world.
Yeah.
Because the false ego can become so powerful. Even it's dangerous even to start thinking, when we start to make progress in our spiritual life, it's the false ego that suddenly starts to grow into a thing that calls, look how pure you are. See, you are the purest of the pure, and make you identify with something that is so falsely misaligned with the real ego that you are, which Krishna is saying, you are my part and parcel. You are a spiritual, and that becomes a big stumbling block for many, many people. Even we sometimes have to be very careful and be aware of it, that, am I getting into this entrapment of thinking I'm such a pure soul now? Look, I've done so much bhakti and eaten so much prasad and all that, suddenly that can be a sign of a fall down, thinking it totally misaligned from what Krishna was trying to. That is, you have to be careful. That's why you need spiritual master, guide. And he guides you, to make you understand that ultimately he will give you, or maybe awaken you to your real ego, which is
The soul.
The soul. Yeah.
Good point, actually, Madhusudan, because the spiritual master, he flattens the ego.
That's right. We've all experienced that.
Yeah.
We all suddenly become proud to see, I got recognized today by this, and suddenly we become puffed up, as they say, puffed up ego.
Yeah.
And then the spiritual master will understand that, here he goes again, need to straighten him out a little bit, maybe, but he does it in a nice way. So he chastises a bit or something, and a lesson is learned. And then you say, okay, Maharaj, thank you. You're merciful.
And I like this point about eating prasadam. Yeah, we can eat our ways back to Godhead. Huh?
Yeah, no, that's right. No, what I mean is,
I know.
So many people will use so many different ways of. False ego is tricky.
Yeah. Pretty, is that does that help?
Yes, Prabhu, that does help.
We'll be looking at.
Yeah.
Go on. Sorry, go on.
So I'm sorry. So I was just saying it does help. Like there's difference between the false ego and pure ego, but I just wanted to know more about the false ego in practical application. Yeah.
I think what Madhusudan Prabhu said very, very well was that when we enter into the spiritual process and we do a little bhakti, we suddenly think, hey, I'm now purified. But we've only just begun. And Prabhupada also says that the ultimate problem with false ego is that it will, at some point, it may recognize itself as God. I am God. You are God, everybody is God. In this Mayavadi philosophy, that's the ultimate snare of material consciousness, the false ego. So we have to be very careful of the false ego.
Okay.
But we're going to look at that again in quite a bit of detail, I think, in the 13th chapter.
Okay.
Yeah, if anybody, you know, my daughter is a psychologist, you know, and she teaches at the in university counseling students, and she goes into this aspect of psychology, which is, and she's got some stuff she's working on called Trikai psychology, where she's incorporating the Vedic concepts into Eastern concepts and Western concepts and psychology and all that. So she's got quite a series of YouTubes and all that she's done on something called Trikai psychology, where she talks about the body, mind, and false ego and all that sort of thing. So, but she's initiated by Shivram Swami, you know, so she takes guidance from Shivram Swami. She's grown up in Krishna consciousness, and she's very dedicated. So, you know, anyway, but that's.
Why don't you put the maybe a website or something on this chat, so that if anybody wants to access that, at least they've got the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, we can do that. You know, and she gives sessions as well.
Yeah.
She's come on Zoom with Birmingham Yatra and done a few sessions with different people.
Oh, we can also think about doing something. If you think it's going to help, we can.
Yeah, it helped. You know, a lot of because she's in that field and she's counseling students at university in Hatfield. She works. You know, she's in charge of the department there in psychology. So, and she's done a lot of other stuff, which is like in a trauma. Healing people, helping people to heal from different types of traumas and hypnosis. Yeah, she does hypnosis, past life regression. She's done quite a lot of different things. But anyway, she's okay. If anybody wants to, I can give more details.
Any more questions? For anybody? Anybody like to ask anything else? Otherwise, we can move to the next section, which is quite a big session, but it shouldn't hopefully take too long.
Yeah, move on. Yeah.
Preeti, would you like to read?
Okay, Prabhu. We're starting at text 10.
Yeah, please. And everybody should be well alert. Sit up straight. No eyes should be focused on the nose, etc., etc. Sorry, carry on.
Okay. Text 10. A transcendentalist should always engage his body, mind, and self in relationship with the Supreme. He should live alone in a secluded place and should always carefully control his mind. He should be free from desires and feelings of possessiveness. Text 11 to 12. To practice yoga, one should go to a secluded place and should lay kusha grass on the ground and then cover it with a deer skin and a soft cloth. The seat should be neither too high nor too low and should be situated in a sacred place. The yogi should then sit on it very firmly and practice yoga to purify the heart by controlling his mind, senses, and activities and fixing the mind on one point. Text 13 to 14. One should hold one's body, neck, and head erect in a straight line and stare steadily at the tip of the nose. Thus, with an unagitated, subdued mind, devoid of fear, completely free from sex life, one should meditate upon me within their heart and make me the ultimate goal of life. Text 15. Thus practicing constant control of the body, mind, and activities, the mystic transcendentalist, his mind regulated, attains to the kingdom of God or the abode of Krishna by cessation of material existence. Text 16. There is no possibility of one becoming a yogi or Arjun if one eats too much or eats too little, sleeps too much or does not sleep enough. Text 17. He who is regulated in his habits of eating, sleeping, recreation, and work can mitigate all material pains by practicing the yoga system. Text 17. When the yogi, by the practice of yoga, disciplines his mental activities and becomes situated in transcendence, devoid of all material desires, he is said to be well established in yoga. Text 19. As a lamp in a windless place does not waver, so the transcendentalist whose mind is controlled remains always steady in his meditation on the transcendent self. Text 20 to 23. In the stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. Text 24. One should engage oneself in the practice of yoga with determination and faith and not be deviated from the path. One should abandon, without exception, all material desires born of mental speculation, and thus control all the senses on all sides by the mind. Text 25. Gradually, step by step, one should become situated in trance by means of intelligence sustained by full conviction, and thus the mind should be fixed on the self alone and should think of nothing else. Text 26. From wherever the mind wanders due to its flickering and unsteady nature, one must certainly withdraw it and bring it back under the control of the self. Text 27. The yogi whose mind is fixed on me verily attains the highest perfection of transcendental happiness. He is beyond the mode of passion. He realizes his qualitative identity with the Supreme, and thus he is freed from all reactions to past deeds. Text 28. Thus, the self-controlled yogi, constantly engaged in yoga practice, becomes free from all material contamination and achieves the highest stage of perfect happiness in transcendental loving service to the Lord. Text 29. A true yogi observes me in all beings and also sees every being in me. Indeed, the self-realized person sees me, the Supreme Lord, everywhere. Text 30. For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me. Text 31. Such a yogi who engages in the worshipful service of the Supersoul, knowing that I and the Supersoul are one, remains always in me in all circumstances. Text 32. He is a perfect yogi who, by comparison to his own self, sees the true equality of all beings in both their happiness and their distresses. O Arjun.
Thank you very much. So, this is Ashtanga Yoga. Krishna has just given Arjun quite a heavy dose of renounced yoga, starting from controlling the senses through yamanas, the restraining yourself, different aspects of it, niyama, observing different aspects of purity, contentment, austerity, study, surrender. Then the asanas, the physical hatha yoga. Krishna explains also pranayam, breathing exercises. Pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses, where you try to be like the tortoise. Anything attacks you, all the limbs, all the senses are withdrawn. Then focus. Krishna explains a lot about this, how to focus yourself. Sit up straight, close your eyes, or just look at the tip of your nose and focus. And then dhyan, meditate. And then ultimately that will lead to samadhi. Now this is quite heavy. And you see the next, we won't do it today, we do it tomorrow. Arjun challenges Krishna, can't do it. This is just too much. Can't do it. And that was Krishna's purpose, to demonstrate to him that Astanga Yoga, renunciation of all of your duties, going to the forest, is not your way. And in fact, in this Kali Yuga, it's nobody's way, because we are not powerful enough, not strong. Our natures are not suitable to perform Astanga Yoga. So, this is a way to control, of course, your mind, living in seclusion, practicing celibacy, the strict regulations of eating, sleeping, sitting in a proper situated place, focusing consciousness, meditating for years and remaining silent. So Krishna wanted to demonstrate to Arjuna that you will not be able to do this. So the lesson to take from this, from our point of view, is what Krishna has explained to Arjuna is difficult to practice in its entirety in this age of Kali. And that's what Krishna wanted Arjuna to understand. Even in the Dwapara Yuga, for Arjuna to practice that would be very difficult. And so he cannot become a sannyasi in the forest. His nature will not allow him, because he had a fighting nature. His fighting spirit would not allow him to stay in the forest and tolerate injustice. However, there is there's quite a few nice takes from this series of verses that we read from our point of view. Especially, I wanted to focus on one of the texts and use that as a lesson. Eating too much, eating too little, sleeping too much, sleeping too little. Krishna says, if you're doing any of those things, there's very little possibility of becoming a yogi. And we're talking about bhakti yogi. So that this principle applies in Astanga Yoga, it applies to Bhakti Yoga equally. So this is something that we can learn. Eating just enough to maintain body and sleeping just enough to make sure we're fresh enough to continue tomorrow. So regulate our eating, regulate our sleeping. Very important. So this is the lesson that I wanted to share with the devotees. Madhusudan, it's 5 o'clock, but we can carry on for a few minutes.
Yeah, few minutes, and there's not a lot, and it's good that you've highlighted those points about eating, sleeping, and then regulating our habits. And so once we get into good habits, and as I always tell, a lot of devotees who used to come across, and they would say, I would say, learn to have a good balance in life, with everything that you do, and good habits. And as somewhere I came across where he said, in the beginning we make the habits, and then gradually the habits make us.
Yes.
So
yeah, that's good.
We have to learn to develop the right habits from the very beginning. And having been a school teacher and a lot of students in my life, they would come across, and I would say, whatever you do, have a good balance, look after your body, your mind, and your intelligence. All three aspects we have touched in this chapter, and all three needs to be in a good balance as well, as we progress. And ultimately, it's the spiritual aspect that starts to bring everything in balance. So, and like we were saying about the false ego and all that, and then you've invited me to these sessions, and I'm honored to and share my experiences. And constantly, I'm always been aware that keep my false ego in check. And I always think that I hope I'm not saying something that just out to impress anybody, or to gain appreciation, or And that sort of thing is also something that I keep a check in my personal life.
I can give you some feedback on that. Whatever you're saying is coming from the heart. I can feel it.
Yeah, I hope so. And that's what Guru Maharaj also taught me. Is that he was also a school teacher, and I could relate with him because he was a headmaster of a school. And I was school and teaching, and out there to try and impress. Otherwise, you start to boost your own ego too much, and then that can be your own too much pride and
people see through it. People see through it.
People see through it, and I've come across a lot of personalities who ultimately then end up being so. I've fallen for those sort of people as well, and suddenly I find, they're just charismatic characters, They were just out there and impressed me a little bit, this and that, but there was no substance.
Yeah.
The only person who has really impressed me in this world are two people.
Prabhupada.
One is Prabhupada. I'm sold out to Prabhupada. No person like him who was self-realized and so spiritually, and his purports are the fruits of his realizations. And then Maharaj, in my personal life, having spent time with him, and all the time, like yesterday was such a good session with, was that Maharaj's name?
NND Maharaj, yes.
Yeah, but he highlighted so many aspects of the spiritual master and disciple relationship that, we're always separated, like you said, and we were not always physically with Maharaj. He was sometimes in Bharat, he was in Mauritius, he was traveling around this, that. But, and there were times when even Maharaj was here and I would not be able to see him, come and see him, or spend time with him. Or then there was times where under certain circumstances, I was distancing myself a little bit, but I was never felt that, I was separated, So like that, we keep in touch with the Vani of the spiritual master and keep advancing.
So what you were saying about the thoughts or the actions, what your thoughts, they become words. What your words, they become actions. What your actions, they become habits.
That's
And
right.
what your habits, they become your character. So this is the interesting point. And your character becomes your destiny.
Yeah, thank you.
It's quite interesting parampara there. Has anybody got any questions or any comments on this particular point? Krishna has just elaborated on quite heavy yogic system. And all we're taking out of it is don't eat too much, don't eat too little, don't sleep too much, don't have a good balance in your life. Everybody happy with that?
And just a quick point, the chapter 6 is as far as Maharishi Yogi could go in his comments on Bhagavad Gita. Because after this, Krishna, even Arjun, like you said, Arjun rejects this. He said, this is too much for me. And with Maharishi Yogi, if you go into his a little bit more, you'll find that he got a little bit perverted and they got into levitation and all that sort of thing. No. So I said, where is this taking us, So you got to be a bit careful. But yeah, good balance, and we'll be in the right track here. Okay. I'm glad Prabhupada saved me as well from all that.
Yeah, that's true. Saved all of us. So if there's no questions or comments, we can move into, let's do the Nishinga Kavach. Thank you very much, dear devotees. Bhagavad Gita ki jai.
Thank you, Haribol.
So we've done about half of the chapter. We'll carry on, finish. Hopefully, we'll finish the rest of the chapter tomorrow. Okay, so just yes, Karuna Bandar, you. Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, great.
Shri Lakshmi Narasimha Dev ki jai, Prahlad Maharaj ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai.